Hey, I'm Lily, and today I'm going to be talking about a video that I've been talking about doing for a long time, and that is talking about a coding project for the channel. So, some of you may be aware, if you've been with the channel for a while, a ways back, I had a small series doing some coding for a Stellaris mod I was working on. And then I realized, what I'm working on, Stellaris wasn't really the best canvas for it, and I did some other stuff and kind of ceased development of it, and then kind of dropped the whole idea together. It was called Theosaur. But I have wanted to, ever since then, keep doing a kind of coding project for the channel. So, as some of you are aware, I've been a C# programmer for a while now, and I've been kind of pushing it to more of a professional state, and I'm actually switching my careers over right now. In the middle of that, switching from more calligraphy to that sort of thing. And yeah, so I figured I kind of want to do a project that is going to be a game from scratch, and I'll both be doing like some videos like I did before, like working on specific aspects, as well as also just kind of doing streams for it. So that'll be real exciting. I kind of was like spurred. I keep meaning to do this, I keep meaning to do this, I keep meaning to do this. And then I spent the weekend watching Lindum Dare people working on that. And I was like, you know what, I gotta do this video, and I will get started with this. So, yeah, and here we are. So, ages ago, I ran a poll for kind of like figuring out like what kind of game we want to make with the channel. And kind of what people settled on was either showing off like just doing work on the current game I've been working on, which is called Bibliomancy. But I'm actually at the point where I kind of want to push that development to be doing it like myself on my own, and that kind of being my own thing. Because I'm actually kind of looking into gauging if there is interest in getting it published. So I won't necessarily be really showing off that too much until I'm actually like showing it off when it's like, this is a beta state, and being like, hey, are people interested in me like pushing it to actually be released, that you could like support the beta and get in and like play it, and as I'm working on development and willing to fund continued development of this game. But that is not what this video is about. So the other thing that was like highest was just doing kind of like a simple little RPG. Like, fun fact, I adore RPGs. I might have played one or two. I might talk about at least tabletop RPGs a lot on here. And honestly, when it comes to designing RPGs, like from the ground up, like designing computer ones, knowledge and like theory behind tabletop RPGs applies very much. More so than like the knowledge of like tabletop RPG like applies to computer RPGs, like playing them. So while being in the PC seat for between computer games and tabletop RPGs was very different. Being in the DM seat, while not complete, like also very different, has more similarities with being in the game designer / programmer's seat. So yeah, so we are going to be making just a little RPG, and I want it also to be very community involved, and I'll go over some things that later, but I just want to get your input and like kind of what things we want to be going with. I am going to have a design document that is both linked on the Discord, on the community Discord. As always, check that out in the link description below. It's awesome, it has lots of awesome people, including also me and other awesome people. Not to presume that I am awesome, but let's face it, I'm awesome. Yeah. What was I talking about? But there's a whole channel talking about that, so if you want to like discuss anything discussed here, you can just sit there or in the comments below and get that precious engagement. Not that I really care about that. So yeah, so I want to get involved, both like on actual like assets and stuff like that, and also just general like kind of design, like what do we want to do. And on that design document, which is linked in the description below, which isn't fully done, I have some pretty much questions laid out, and questions I'll go over here too. But yeah. So without further ado, the game that I'm pitching. Also, if you hate this idea and want me to just go back to the drawing board, and if like feel like it isn't gonna work, it isn't something you're interested in, let me know that too, because I'm willing to be like, hey, if this isn't something that people want to see, I can pitch another idea. But essentially what it's going to be is a adaptation of my campaign setting of JRPG The Dark Empire. So those who haven't watched like my one video I did in Dark Empire, it didn't do very well, but so it's in the world of generic RPG, which is like my world of like overblown like fantasy and RPG tropes and stuff like that, which it doesn't really matter. But it's focused on the Dark Empire, which is this sinister like place and whatnot, where it's like the evil like corrupt government is like oppressing like the people, and it's obviously it's like it was based on like this plucky group of like kind of like people like rebels against the empire, the government and stuff. So it is a very much a blend of kind of like cyberpunk themes with like more of like a fantasy spin to it. And that's kind of where it comes down to. Nope, that's too much hair in front. I'm like, okay, if my hair's back here with the lighting, it looks like I don't have hair. Like in the back where it's like very short, but like here, it just seems like way too much hair. So I don't, whatever. Well, that is not important right now. What was I talking about? Hi, this is very ad-libbed. We're back into like classic Lily videos where Lily does not prep at all. I've been doing a lot of things like set reviews and readings and stuff like that, which is like, I know what I'm saying. And we're back to classic of Lily didn't make a script, Lily barely made an outline for what she's saying, and now she's just gonna meander, even though she's supposed to be giving out important information. And now Lily's going on a tangent about how she didn't prep for this, and because she didn't prep, she's filling time talking about how she did not prep for this. Now it's 8 minutes in the video, and she hasn't actually really talked about the game that much. So the general tenets of the game, and I'm actually more or less going through the design document, but you can see more in depth my writings on there. And I'll be constantly expanding this and updating this, and this design document is kind of be the place that we always refer back to when we're like choosing what to make. And if we like make a change to like what our design is, we change it in the design document. And it's kind of like the reference of like what we're building. It's the non-code version of what our game is. So it's going to be some flavor of a single player RPG. Multiplayer RPGs are very hard to make. As soon as you add in a second player, it adds a bunch of like complexities that I don't want to deal with, so we're not going to. It is going to be done in C#. That is the language I know the most, and it's also the primary language of Unity, the game engine I'm most familiar with. So we're going to be using it as Unity for primarily our graphics and UI engine. I'm going to try to be like good and like make sure like it's very like tidy in the back end, and like keeping like the graphics engines and the game engine itself like very separate and unique and like kind of as oblivious to each other as possible. But we'll see. Like, it's not like Bibliomancy, because Bibliomancy I'm taking a lot of time to make sure everything is super modular and super moddable. This one, I might actually make those systems, because if people were interested in me like making this very open-ended, and if people wanted to like make mods for that and like make like plugins and stuff to add like new areas and like dungeons and things like that. If people would be interested in that, let me know. Let me know right now. So, because we should think about that immediately if we want to do that. And it takes place in this kind of like the region of the Dark Empire, and that's kind of the scope. And like kind of like my blurb here is like style-wise, it is supposed to be kind of like very light-hearted and like kind of corny, like making fun of itself and like the overall genre itself. And like it's that mix mash of like fantasy and cyberpunk, and like kind of like I'm also feeling kind of like that JRPG kind of idea of really not knowing what like era it's supposed to be in. Like clearly there's these villages that are like medieval villages, and like you have people fighting with swords and stuff, but then you like break into what is clearly like a modern or like early like 20th century laboratory, and there's people fighting with guns and stuff, and it for some reason is just as efficient as fighting with a sword. Also there's magic, and what role does that have to do with the society? Who knows, because that doesn't matter. So it's kind of like this mismatch of just jumbled up, and it's like at its core it's like our players are the part of these like brave like rebels trying to take down like this evil like the Dark Empire, and in the end the true enemy, as always in most of my stuff, is capitalism. So next part of the dev diary is or design document is my section on gameplay, which I have not written yet. Just something like I just haven't thought about. Like, first off, it's like, okay, in combat, like, what do we want our combat system to look like? Do we want it to be kind of like a, like, turn-based, like, early era, like, Final Fantasy, kind of like, you choose your actions, your opponent goes, they choose their actions, and you're fighting back and forth, and kind of like, you choose the actions of your team. That's nice, because it's the easiest to program the AI for. Or do we want to have to be kind of like a classic, like, top-down, like, hack and slash, like, real-time, kind of like Zelda-esque, like early Zelda-esque, fighting, thing? Also we could do a full 3D engine, which we're not doing because I do not know that I'm not good enough for 3D modeling, and I do not have enough experience with, like, Unity 3D. Like, this is primarily going to be a 2D thing that we're making. And then out of combat, how do we want out of combat to work? Like, do we want like a like open field where you like run around and do stuff like that, like with like sprites and stuff, and then like you go into a combat screen if it's like turn-based? Or do we want kind of like, one thing we could do is we could even like make it kind of like a Myst-like, that like then goes in that turn-based combat. Being kind of like, okay, you click like kind of like adventure game-esque, I guess you could call it, where it's like you click screen to screen and it moves you from place to place. That might be a bit more art intensive because you can't do sprite graphics. I guess you could do sprite graphics. And like, oh, that'd be almost like doing like, if you remember, if you played like Neopets back in the day, when you'd like go on these like events and quests that were just like clicking through screens and stuff. That could be an interesting thing. And like, these are all questions, and I'll probably write out more of these in the coming days as like questions to actually talk about. Also in the design document, I do believe I will have comment powers for anyone with links, so you can comment on anything directly on the document. But if you want me to see it, best it's to comment on the video or on the Discord. Discord is probably the absolute best part, because then I can reply immediately and other people can talk about it. And then finally on the game section is like, how do I want the economy to work? Like, do we want like it just be very simple, if like, okay, enemies drop loot, you can sell the loot and like buy stuff at like merchants? Like, do we want to like have a crafting system? Because it's like, there's one thing as far as it's what kind of scope do we want to be building this game? Because we want to keep it kind of very focused and simple, and maybe just like having the ability to add stuff in later, like maybe we don't, like in our first iteration, we don't have a crafting system, but leaving the stuff in there that we could add a crafting system. Alright, so first up we have the plot. What am I saying here? So I've talked about the setting bit, so we don't have to worry about that. One thing that question I do have to ask is how close, like what kind of like array of like races do we want in the game? Because that's one way to like distinguish ourselves from like it's how close do we want to be from D&D, because we're basing this off of a D&D campaign setting, but part of me wants to make it like a bit more distinct. Like we could have like so one thing is like, do we want to have like a full range of races where we're like all sorts of stuff, like not like exactly D&D, but like the full menagerie of fantasy style races. Or do we just want to be like very limited and kind of like the fantasy all-stars of like humans, elves, dwarves, and maybe some of those, and kind of just being a bit more focused on like what it is, or do we just want to just do humans, which is honestly easiest for like sprite creation, things like that. Although I expect for like sprites, it's mostly gonna be like, hey, this NPC has a sprite and it does not change no matter what you have equipped to it. Or like maybe like the like legendary armor for that character or whatever like has a unique sprite, but otherwise not really. So the main plot, let me look up something, was essentially that the Dark Empire is kind of like is divided into like 6 main sections with like this big city in the center, the Serpentine City, and then there's like these big like bridges and like roads that like spur out and like make 6 sections. And I was kind of like thinking about doing just like a very like classic like early era like RPG thing where it's like each of those areas is like one like part of like that part of the game. Like so you start out in like one of the 6 like provinces, and it's like, oh look, I've beat the end boss of that dungeon, and of that dungeon, now I can go to the next province where like the next like chapter 2 of the story takes place. And eventually after the end they finally reach the Serpentine City, which is kind of like the 7th like final area that like the plot concludes in. And that's kind of what I was thinking. So it's like going around and like very sequential. There might be some like looping back and stuff, because it's the main enemy of this campaign is actually going to be very similar to the main enemy of the original D&D campaign, and that is essentially you're breaking it like the Dark Empire is up to something, and specifically their science division. And so you're breaking into the labs of the League of Morally Compromised Scientists and going in, like fighting your way through swarms of goons and experiments and whatnot like that. And like leading up to like that, it's like these laboratories are like the end dungeons of each one, where it's like everything before that on the chapter is like figuring out like where is the laboratory here, like where have they gone off to, because you have the upper council of the League of Morally Compromised Scientists, which the first one they fight is High Scientist Xenon, and all the High Scientists do sound like they are part of a Pokemon team. I won't lie, that was not intentional, but all the High Scientists are named after noble gases. So you have High Scientist Helium, High Scientist Neon, High Scientist Argon, High Scientist Krypton, High Scientist Xenon, High Scientist Radon, and High Scientist Ogasinon. I need to look at the pronunciation of that one. Ogasinon will probably be like the end boss for like the like lesser known 7th noble gas and High Scientist. So that's kind of like the idea there. And then, like, in terms of, like, side plots and stuff, I'm really not sure. Like, that's, like, the overall structure of the story, but honestly, I really need to do more kind of, like, world building and, like, working out, like, what is each of the provinces like, and things like that. I do kind of want to have this, like, side, thing with the, rise of the cult of Victus. Victus being the minor god of, poison. Very, very clever in the name. Whoever thought that the god Victus would be the god of poisons and snakes? The giant snake that they find in the first dungeon, and kind of like a subplot where it's like, do you want to help Victus? Because they've been experimenting on Victus, but Victus might seem a bit evil, so do you want to help re-establish the Church of Victus, and they might help you? Or are you going to try to make both adversaries and kind of like just have like a choice? Like, even if it's like, we're not going for like a full branching storyline, because it's a very limited scope RPG we're building. But yeah. But at the end of the day, the story stuff is a long way off. A lot of the early work will just be building out the engine and stuff like that. So the story stuff isn't as important, because we have a lot of stuff before we actually start making zones and doing the zone coding and whatnot. So next up we have like, okay, who do we want the player character to be? There's kind of like I have like 4 main options that we could do for who the player character is. And on one hand, we have the blank slate, which is the character is kind of a nobody. You're not really playing as anyone. Like, the real, like, people in the story are, like, the NPCs in your party and people around you. You're just kind of there as this, like, driving force where your dialogue, you're not really that important to the story. Your background isn't that important. You're just there, and you're whoever you are, and who you are does not really matter. So it's like, it's very easy to implement, other than like, us, I'm a resistance fighter. And whenever we obviously make JRPG the Dark Empire 2, you'll just be like, almost non-existent. It's like the actions of the hero, like, that they're playing, really is just represented by the actions of the NPCs around them, which is kind of like how the original Guild Wars handled its lore. So, like, in Guild Wars 1, essentially, the player character doesn't really exist, but it was like the group of like Menlo and Sin and Divana. Those were the people who did the events of Guild Wars, and like the actual like official like lore after the fact. It wasn't you, the player character. Like, you are just kind of like a stand-in for one of the members of this party, and that's kind of what the blank slate would be. The next one would be kind of like, do we want to allow for like a more full customization for your character, which is more of like a modern RPG thing. And one thing that could work for is like, do we want to like, okay, you can choose like your race and your class and like maybe some like minor cosmetic changes and things like that. And but that does require like some issues where like it's a lot more dev work to implement that stuff and a lot of more artwork to implement all that. But also with like more of a full customization, you still really can't have your character that tied to the story because you can't really like establish who they are. Which leads to the next one, which is like kind of that opposite, where it's not a blank slate, but the player character is like playing a specific character, and you are playing this character. So think Legend of Zelda, you're playing Link, and there's nothing you can do to not play Link. So you'll play Gwen, and you're playing Gwen's story, and it's going to be great, and you're playing as Gwen. Gwen has an established like story and reason she hates the Dark Empire because they murdered her brother, and now she must seek revenge against High Scientist Xenon and his dastardly crew of scientists who extracted her brother's essence or something. And you have that reason to like, yes, that is why I'm doing this. but this allows you, like, it will allow it to, like, really be connected to the story. It allows it to, like, really interwove it. This can, like, add the most engaging because it's like, you have a character, you are playing this character, you don't really have a hand on who they are, but you can really step into their shoes. The main issue of this is that it does impact replayability. Like, we could do the slight variant of it, like with the next one, which is choice of backgrounds, which we'll talk about differently. But the established background, essentially, we could be like, we're playing Gwen, and you can play like a few different variants where you can be like, okay, this is Gwen spec as like a warrior, Gwen spec as a mage, Gwen spec as like a magi chemist. I don't know. I haven't decided how I want the class structure to work. And then finally we have the choice of backgrounds, where it's kind of like this middle ground between the full customization and the established background, where essentially here's like 3 to 5 characters you can choose from, and like they all interact differently. Like with the characters, they all have things. It's like, okay, do you want to be like Gwen, whose brother was taken by that? Do you want to play, or you could play as like Vlad, the like hunter from the wilds who was mad about the Dark Empire's new poaching laws or whatever, and or Stu, who he's Stu, so, and he has his own reasons for getting into it. And it's like, yeah, so like they'll still be incorporated in the story, but really from a writing perspective, we can't incorporate each one as well into the main story, but we can kind of have that. So realistically, I think the two most like ones I lean towards is either established background, where we are making a character that they're playing on. Blank slate, I think also, because blank slate is kind of like the same thing, but it's just like the amount of work that put into that character. But also, or we just go full customization, where it's a full customization, but there's still kind of a blank slate when it comes to the story. So, and that's one thing we should talk about, like in the combat system, is how do I want classes to work? Like, do we want to actually have like character classes? And actually, that's just something to talk about when we go to the next part of characters, which is teammates. And I think one of the biggest things in the teammates is, do we want to have a variable party or a static party? So variable being, hey, there's a lot, like, think like Baldur's Gate, where there's lots of like NPCs you can like pick up and like join your party, but you can only have like a party of like up to 4 or so, and that's, you can have like a mix and match, and like some you like unlock very late, and like depending on who you have, like it gives you different abilities and like strategies and builds and whatnot. This has positives and negatives. One, it's a bit more writing, it's a bit more like asset work and things like that. It allows for a lot better replayability and like control over who the story is. It is harder to incorporate them into the story, like outside of like specific character quests, because when you pick up Stu, who's Mysterious Stu, the I can't think of a rhyme that makes sense. Mysterious Stu, I can't think of anything. Mysterious Stu. When you pick up Mysterious Stu, he yeah, you might have like his like quest where you have to go like uncover what's so mysterious about Stu, and you might have that. But like when it comes to the actual like main plot lines, it doesn't really matter, and like he doesn't really interact with the characters that much, like, because let's be honest, we don't have a writing team to like write like full like Dragon Age-esque like dialogue between every single possible party member combination, because that is so much. But then the other side of that is that we could have a static team where it's hey, after the first, like early on, you pick up your childhood friend Vlad the Hunter, who joins your team and is like, yep, it's you and Vlad. And after the second zone, you also pick up Stu, and then finally you pick up, I'm gonna go with Karen. I don't know why. So you have and it's you always are playing with those, but that lets you have like a bit more tight into the story, where it's like Karen was trapped in a lab of high scientist helium and now has to deal with that, and like you're actually dealing with them. Each character has a stake in like why they're in this together, and they can have interactions where it's like Karen can have the falling out of Stu because Karen thinks Stu's too mysterious, and that's the only character trait I've given to Stu. Mysterious Stu's gonna end up in the final game, isn't he? And kind of like that. So it's like, what do we want to do? Like, that one like allows them to engage in more of the story, but at the cost of replayability, where it's very easier to integrate. And also part of this is with a static party that kind of chooses how we choose to do the class system. With a static party, we can kind of like have like each character has their own unique skill tree and stuff like that. So, and I think static works best with also established background or choice of backgrounds for the PC option, because it's like each of those backgrounds, like for the player as well as the NPCs, like has their own like unique skill trees and their archetypes, and we don't actually have to build out like a class for them. On the other hand, like variable, if we have like lots of different NPCs you can choose from, then we're probably going to want some sort of like, okay, these are mage characters, these are warrior characters, and so on and so forth, and have a rudimentary class system. So depending on what we do, that might change like how we handle progression and things like that. Like, I do want to have like a pretty like fleshed out like skill like tree, like where you like can assign points and stuff, because I love that in games. One thing we could also do is we could have it kind of like a no character has a class. Like, they might have like some unique skills they can access, but they all generally have the same stats. But you could like, if you really want to force Stu into being like a priest of the elf god, you can, even though he starts as like a dual wielding rogue. If you want to make him that devout priest, you can just push against his initial stats and make him that, and that's another option. But like, all of the answers that we settle on, and also please legitimately actually give me feedback on this, like I want to have some community work with this, but legitimately all of the stuff we have for this, like each of these options will lead to more questions, like depending on what the PC, like what class is going to be like for like, and like, how do we want to handle classes? How do we want to handle skill trees? How do we want to handle progression? Like, all those things are really important. Like, what are the stats we're playing? Like, what combat system are we using at all? Because we have to design a combat system from the ground up, and that's really exciting. And then finally, we have a whole section on NPCs, and really, we can't really talk about that NPCs and like how we want to handle them until we really have established more of the story and like how the system works. I will likely have the system where NPCs are fundamentally statistically different than players, just kind of like they're hard coded to have certain abilities. We're not like building like, this is like a mage NPC, I'm gonna actually make them a mage as like we'd make a team member a mage. We're just gonna give him like mage like abilities and call it a day. It just allows for more control, and it's generally how most games do it nowadays, although it has not always been that way. Alright, then the final section of me meandering is just kind of like, what is the aesthetic of the game we want it to be? Like, what do we want to go? So one thing I was thinking about is I was thinking, because this is a game that's purposefully corny, and one thing I was thinking about was like purposefully poorly done bad pixel art. I have an example right here of kind of the idea where it is pixel art, but exactly that, where it's just explicitly supposed to be bad, and that's about how I have to say. Where it's very intentional. It's very corny. Like, it's recognizable, but it is objectively not beautiful. So, and then we have some questions there, like what base do we want to do it? Like how large do we want, how large do we want each individual pixel to be? So like what kind of like bit type do we want to do? Like what is the standard size of a sprite and things like that? That's all important things to think about. Like what kind of color palette do we want to be? Do we want to kind of like be all monochromatic, where we just choose a color and that's what everything is about? Do we kind of like by sprite monochromatic, like limited pixel art palettes, a full palette range, or kind of the inconsistent? But also with the bad pixel art style, anyone can make bad pixel art. So that is something I'd be totally willing to, if people just want to kind of like crowdsource this thing and just kind of like contribute their own art. When we get to that point, like I'll put a guide to be like, this is how big we want it, this is the file format I need it in. Here's a list of things that currently don't have sprites. Have fun. So yeah. Next thing is like we have to talk about is UI. UI design is going to probably just be something we have to like figure out once we actually get further along. We just can't talk about UI that much because we don't know what the game is going to look like mechanically. Like, are we going to be doing kind of like a Myst-like, or we could be doing more of like a thing? And also the UI is something that we are probably going to be fiddling with constantly before we actually come up with something we're actually using. Next up is like music. I have no musical talent, so likely we're just gonna be going for open source, kind of like 8-bit MIDI pieces. Unless someone wanted to contribute some like stuff like that, but we're going to have like some classic like early RPG era music, and that's kind of what I was thinking for this. And then dialogue. So one thing that is also something for potential for community collaboration is, do we just want to have text dialogue? And that is always an option. Or do we want to do like voice acting? Like we could do it just for the main characters, like try to get everything in, and like allow people like come in and like talk with people, like do voices. Like if someone wanted to be like, it's time for auditions for who wants to be Mysterious Stew, or like High Scientist Xenon and things like that. So that's like an option. It does add a lot more work to do, but if people are interested, I think it'd be a fun community thing that we could do. And also just like one option that's like kind of like not super important right now, but it's the option of, should the protagonist talk? Like, are we going full Link where our protagonist is just mysteriously silent? And you know, if it is, we will be referencing that constantly, how the protagonist does not say anything. Or do we want to have just be kind of like, it like that works like decently if we're kind of doing like blank slate or like open-ended kind of player character. Otherwise we can like, if it's like, if you're playing as Gwen, whose brother died and was experimented on, essence extracted by the High Scientist Xenon, obviously it's much easier for her to have dialogue that like makes sense. So that's kind of like an option to like have. And then finally for like just like other sounds and stuff, I was saying like it'd be kind of fun to do like videos. They're like kind of like ASMR-ish, where it's kind of just doing like a Foley sound work and working through that, and that could be fun. But that's another, like, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And that's about what I have to talk about. So as I said, link in the description, sign down below, but please legitimately tell me what you think. Like, what do you have any preferences, like how you want this to be? Any suggestions, like for literally any part of this? Like, it's very much a blank slate, and I really want it to be a community thing. And once it's at a playable state, even if it's not like done, I will hopefully soon have my website up soon, which will be kind of like a center for all my content creation. But Unity works just embedded on the web, and just like having it up there where anyone can just play JRPG The Dark Empire, this like community made game. And yeah, so let me know what you think. I'll definitely, probably like the early videos, I'll probably be like early parts of it, I'll probably mostly be streaming kind of like the live source of like how are we like building this game and things like that. I'll probably have another follow-up video kind of solidifying like what we're doing based on like kind of how people think about this here. So yeah, well, I don't have too much else to say here. Yeah. So yeah, no, let me know how you think. Please, pretty please, some sugar on top. But yeah, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm really excited about this. It will be a lot of fun. I've always kind of wanted to make an RPG, and yeah. Well, I hope you all have a wonderful night, and sleep well. And as always, may your stories smile upon you.